Let's bring in Meghan Angley from DNVR Sports. We've wanted to have her on for a long time. And Meghan, we were discussing it yesterday. It would be great if it were under better circumstances, but nice team you got there. Down 3-1 to the Stars, and your leading scorer, Val Nichushkin, suspended for 6 months. So I guess we'll just start with what was yesterday like for you?
It was an emotional gut punch, but I can only imagine how that felt for the team, because it felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath them, and it was shades of the Seattle series again. And not just because Val Nichushkin leaving is exactly what happened in the Seattle series, but it felt like circumstances just kept stacking atop one another in an insurmountable way. Like, of course, Devon Toews is also out due to mystery illness, alongside the news of Val Nichushkin being suspended for 6 months. The complexion of their top six completely changes just a couple hours before puck drop in what is an important game for the Avs in their home arena, and it of course produces the result that we all saw. So it was really difficult from a news standpoint to be delivering just bad news after bad news, even with Jonathan Drouin drawing back into the lineup. It was a really difficult day.
How difficult is it to cover like the Nichushkin thing? Because obviously this is the second year in a row. It's a sensitive issue, but like, I mean, I saw quotes coming out from, I forget who said it in the locker room, but it was
Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson was like, he made his decision, and it's like clearly that he's letting those guys down, and you can kind of feel it.
You can absolutely feel it, because coming into training camp this year, it was McKinnon and Makar who did an availability at the start. And that was something I asked Makar about, was how Val Nichushkin earns their trust back after the Seattle series. And both McKinnon and Makar had great answers for this, and it was essentially who Val Nichushkin is as a teammate is incredibly hardworking, and when he shows up the way that they know that he can, that's how he builds back trust. So for the work that he had put in throughout the course of this season, and obviously it doesn't go off without a hitch. He enters the player assistance program around January in the season, so I think players are wise to the fact that he's still struggling with something, but it's still difficult to see him. I don't even want to say make poor choices, because it is ultimately down to his decision making, but he is also struggling with something that I don't want to pretend to know about. And so his teammates have conflicted responses, but they ultimately do feel let down. And that's why you see a range of reactions, some that strike a tone that is a little bit more sympathetic. Like, I think Jonathan Drouin's tone, a little bit more sympathetic. Cale Makar's tone, a little bit more sympathetic. But Jack Johnson, Andrew Cogliano, veteran players, they see this play out and they recognize that the playoffs, it's an important time, and they have a teammate who's let them down, and they can only focus on the 20 plus players who are in that room. I think it's understandable for people to feel a little let down, because this has been a really challenging series, and it's not a new struggle for Val Nichushkin. And I think that is maybe what's not going to sit well for a lot of people, that he didn't lean on the support system that he has when he needed it, and fell back into bad habits.
Okay.
And I'm sure like the older guys too, like they probably realize that there is an expiring clock for them, and that this may be one of their last runs. So to have it kind of be derailed, I would imagine that's why some of those guys might be a little bit more emotionally charged. Sorry to cut you off.
No, I was going to say, and just to reset it in case we didn't do a good enough job of setting it up. So Nichushkin failed a drug test, entered into stage 3 of the NHLPA Player Assistance Program, which, if you've listened to this show, mixed opinions from players on how that does. But to Pete's point, Pete and I were basically going to make the same point, where obviously I hope that we're all sympathetic to people with substance abuse issues and drug problems, whatever it may be. However, there is a thing where you should also understand the unreliability aspect of it. That, like, if players are frustrated that they're in a situation where a teammate is unreliable, I don't think they're necessarily saying, and Jack Johnson sounded like he was saying, fuck that guy, basically. But like, I think that a lot of players are probably just frustrated with having an unreliable teammate. Doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that the circumstances that make them unreliable don't deserve sympathy. It seems, though, Meghan, that is a room full of players who are frustrated with this happening time and again.
Well, and the part that we have to consider is they have more knowing of the situation than anybody else. And so the sense that I get is, even looking back in January, Val Nichushkin enters the player assistance program voluntarily. But voluntarily can mean that the team came to him and said, Val, you have a problem. You need to get this in check. And it was, there's the possibility that it's not so much that Val took ownership of his struggles and came to the team and said, I'd like to get help. I don't have a handle on this, versus the team catching him in a bad way and saying, Val, you still don't have a handle on this. You need to get it together. And I think having that kind of inner knowing about what levels of this Val Nichushkin has taken ownership of versus not maybe adds to the layer of frustration that players might feel. That was the sense that I got in the Seattle series in the room too, that there was disappointment, because I think there's that knowing that Val has known that this is something he's struggling with and has not been getting help when it's been offered to him. And it reached a boiling point in the regular season where he was nudged into seeking the help that he needed because there was no other choice.
How surprising was this? Because like on one hand, this is not a new issue, but on the other hand, he's leading the playoffs in goal scoring with 9. Like, what was your sense being around the team? Like, how surprised was the group? How surprised was the media and all that?
That's where it feels like the rug was pulled out from underneath you, because you look at what a huge role he had in the Winnipeg series, and as media, we have such a limited view of the team that I can honestly say there wasn't anything that made me feel weird about Val Nichushkin throughout this point, that he might have been struggling with something behind the scenes. So I know I'm extremely shocked, but hearing Jared Bednar talk about it in the presser and learning about the drug test after morning skate, you could see that the team looked shell-shocked. And I think the first period of the Dallas game reflected a team that just took a huge emotional gut punch. I think that everybody was a little bit surprised by this news, including his teammates.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like that was one of the more dominant periods of the entire playoffs that I've seen. Like the Avs got steamrolled,
and this is a series where every game has started with the Avs getting steamrolled.
And we've also watched every Bruins game first period this playoff run. So to say that like that was the most lopsided period I think we've seen this playoffs says a lot. I mean, what's the temperature in Colorado right now around the Avs? Have people basically given up and said that this is over at this point?
Yes, and I have to make a note about the Avs fan base. They've been very spoiled with a competitive team in a cup window for a little bit now, and they dealt with their share of second-round exits that were extremely disappointing. They finally get the cup after those difficult exits, and now they have this new dragon to slay in a Game 7 in Pete DeBoer. So I think that the attitude, though, is they hold the Avs to such a high standard because you look at this core and it's really hard to watch this series kind of waste away the way that it has, because it feels like we just haven't seen the best of Colorado Avalanche hockey, especially being teased with such great hockey in the Winnipeg series. And I think that's what separates this from the feeling of the Seattle series last year in the first round, is the Avs fan base was spoiled with really impressive hockey in the Winnipeg series, and then given this hope of, and imagine when Jonathan Drouin comes back, how great and competitive this team will be. So I think that pendulum swings both ways for Avs fans quite harshly, and it's just because they've been given such a good product to root for that it's really challenging to see them at these low points. And I want to give credit to Avs fans. They went through those dark days like you were just talking about with Calvin Pickard in the 2016-2017 season. Like, they did their time. So I am sympathetic to Avs fans who feel really down on the team. But the sense in the room is very different from the fan base. It's definitely down, but you can really see the veteran leadership in that room take over in these moments. They're able to say things like, I have confidence that we're going to get this back. Hate to do it in this fashion. Like, we recognize we're on the brink of elimination, but we've been in a position like this before. And I think that's the secret ingredient for the Avs right now, is having been in difficult positions before. I think that they have more mental strength than we're giving them credit for, but I also understand why Avs fans are pretty down right now.
Is there a way back into the series for them? Because through 1, 2, 3 games, I was like, man, I don't think the Avalanche are coming back in this series, and I definitely don't think they're coming back from down 3-1. But if they could just get a 1-goal lead, score the first goal, 2-goal lead or whatever, like we could at least see a slightly different game be played instead of them chasing it. Do you see any way for them back in this series, or are the Stars just not losing 3 games in a row to anybody?
The Stars are great. So their way back in is a very challenging one, but I still believe it exists. Part of it is having played from behind the entirety of this series. Something that Colorado has challenged Dallas with is playing a strong defensive game. Dallas has been forced to do as much, and they've deployed all of their lineup relatively evenly throughout the course of this series. And that's why I think, even looking back at game one, there's a lot of Dallas Stars star players that are off the score sheet, but it is because they are trying to focus on load management and stifling Colorado Stars. And they've done a great job of this. Obviously, Nathan MacKinnon has been contained throughout this series, but that is also not totally sustainable for an entire series. If Colorado gets a lead early and they're not chasing a game, they can meet a tired Dallas Stars team by the third period. I think the difference for them has been trailing in these games, because I think they could have Dallas more or less where they want them late in games if they got the lead early. The other thing is, I think Alexander Georgiev's performance in net has quietly elevated game after game. And I know that's a weird thing to say after a 5-1 loss, but I think that from the mental perspective, which was always a concern with Georgiev, he stayed even keeled and has given them chances to stay in games. If you get the same version of Georgiev or better, I think that's part of the path back to the series. And the final component is the top guys remembering who they are. Because so much in this series, I feel as though Colorado has been playing to counter Dallas's strengths and not focusing enough on their own. And I'd like to see them, without getting too risky with it, lean back into who they are as a team.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fucking wild place to be, but I agree. Like, Georgiev's been really good, and the problem for Colorado has been, like, the one area where they edge Dallas, in my mind, is top flight talent, like a MacKinnon, Makar, Rantanen, and all 3 of those guys have been pretty quiet during this series, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there were a fan vote for Conn Smythe right now, Georgiev is probably going to win it, I would say. It's a
Just
joke
like
about NHL. It's always going to go there. But I'm glad you brought up Georgiev, because I really like the piece that you wrote late in the regular season saying, hey, like, I hope this guy has a good support system. And obviously we talk about Nichushkin, and his issues are different, of course. But, like, what did you see from Georgiev as the season went on that compelled you to write that?
It's the sense that I get. He is a very reserved player. Like, obviously you see the passion on ice, but the way that he conducts himself in the locker room, it feels very withdrawn and reserved. But I've also watched teammates, dap him up after great games, or just interrupt his interviews playfully. Like, I have seen the camaraderie that he has with his teammates, but I just feel like I've seen it more with other goaltenders, like Pavel Francouz. Just, you could tell, was so tight with his group. And Justus Annunen coming in and being a part of the Finnish mafia that's growing in the Colorado Avalanche locker room, like, you see the instant connection. I just had concerns that Georgiev didn't have the support in place to tune out the outside noise, because it was growing louder and he was struggling with it more. And so, it wasn't anything I looked at the team and thought that they fell short in. I just had concerns that, what's the missing connector then? What is stopping Georgiev from being able to tune this out a little bit better? Like, why isn't he doesn't seem to have a great handle on his mental fortitude, at least in those moments, right, in the final stretch of the season. And you look back at his inaugural season in that, and it just didn't feel like these were demons that he was really battling then. So, like, I more so wanted to know what was different about this year for him, and what was perhaps made more challenging. But I also don't think he doesn't have support and friends in the locker room. I just wondered if they needed to be galvanized to rally around him even more in those moments. And I saw it in the Winnipeg series, just to shout it out. Looking at the team reaction at coming out of that horrific game one, everybody rallied around Georgiev in an obvious way. And I think that made the difference in the series, because there was this blind confidence, like, win or lose, that is our starting goaltender. And I think that Georgiev needed that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got some pushback when we were like critical of Georgiev. I think a lot of people from Colorado like came to his defense and were like, listen, team's not playing that great in front of him. Hasn't played that great, but also it's not completely his fault. So I'm glad that he looks better. Like I'm not like rooting against the guy. So before we get you out of here, I do want to ask you this question. What are the chances in your mind that we see Gabe Landeskog before this series ends, and would it make a difference for Colorado?
I think it's 0, and I don't think it would make a difference, only because Gabriel Landeskog, not having played hockey for 2 years, entering a series is not going to look like Gabriel Landeskog for a little while. But you can tell how sorely he is missed in this series, and I'm looking forward to the possibility of him returning to play at the start of next season and then ramping up to shades of the Landeskog we once knew.
He's still not skating, right?
He is.
Or he started skating?
He's messing with us too. Like, originally he had been wearing just kind of sweatsuits and coming to morning skate briefly. Now he's staying longer and he's wearing like a Power Play 1 jersey immediately after Bednar said he's not close to returning to practicing with the team. So I think that he is a warrior and he's trying his hardest to get back and having some fun with it.
All right. Well, all the best to him. I think that his teammates will be joining him briefly in skating recreationally, let's just say. But Meghan, it's great that you joined us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you down the road. That's Meghan Angley of DNVR.
We all silly like the mayor.